What's up, y'all? Welcome to another episode of Young and Married.
Yeah.
We are here to help your relationship thrive, particularly your Christian marriage thrive,
Yep.
but also your relationship, your dating relationship, your engaged relationship. And today's episode is so dope because y'all may not know it, but we answer questions.
We do.
So sometimes we'll get questions in our inbox on Instagram.
Yeah.
And we have a series of questions we've gotten. And so today we're answering one of them.
Yeah.
And the question we received, Mark, was very simple question. The question was, how do you deal with difficult in-laws? That was it. How do you deal with difficult in-laws? So I don't know what the specifics are for this person in terms of what they're finding difficult.
Yeah.
But they were like, can y'all please tell us as a married couple, how do you deal with difficult in-laws?
Listen, now there's so much to unpack there. There's like so much to really dissect. So I'm actually going to let you start this one. But I think that we just want to establish that in-laws will make or break your marriage.
Yeah.
Oh my, like in-laws will absolutely make or break your marriage.
Yeah.
All right. So what do you have to say about that, Jen, to kick it off? Because we all wrestle with this and we've seen so many marriages crumble.
Yeah.
Just based off of in-laws.
Yeah, I have so many thoughts already swirling in my mind. So maybe I'll start with a story. Obviously, I won't name names, but I have a friend that I became friends with as a teenager, and she and I attended each other's weddings. Excuse me. We attended each other's weddings, and we're both excited to be young women getting married.
Yeah.
And her issue was her mother-in-law would always, when I say always, I mean they 100% of the time would always say her name incorrectly. So her name isn't Mary, so let's go with Mary.
Right.
So if my friend's name is Mary, she said that they would go to the house and her mother-in-law would say, "Hey, Maria." And she'd be like, "So my name's Mary." And she'd be like, "Oh, girl, I'm so sorry."
Yeah.
And then maybe they would have her over to their house and she would be like, "What's up, Margaret?" Wow. And she was like, "So my name is Mary." And her husband started to say, like, "Mom, you know her name is Mary."
Right.
She said literally like every version of her name, or every spin-off of her name, that's what her mother-in-law would say. "Hey, Marguerite." "Hey, Michaela." "Hey, Mia." "Hey, Maya." But she would not say Mary. And she said she noticed that it started with that. And she said her mother-in-law would always make digs like, "Girls, something about your name is just not memorable. I can't remember it."
Right. And it's easy. It's Mary.
It's Mary. So she said that the problem was that initially they tried to just brush it off.
Yeah.
And then that level of disrespect led to just other levels of disrespect. Things like them asking her, "Don't just show up at our house when you want." But now she's just popping up when she wants.
Yeah.
And so I would say one of the first things about in-laws is that you have to remember when you get married, the Bible says, "Therefore shall a man leave his mother and father and cleave to his wife." Now, by leave, the Bible doesn't mean that he has to just totally cut them off.
Come on.
However, your spouse now becomes number one.
Absolutely.
After God, it's now your spouse. So when you're single, it's God, then it's probably your parents.
Yeah.
And so on and so forth. But once you get married, God still holds that place as number one, but then it's spouse.
Absolutely.
And so I would say one of the first things about dealing with difficult in-laws is that you have to not only set boundaries, but you have to be bold enough to stick with your boundaries.
Right.
Like one of our boundaries in marriage, and neither side has ever tried to violate this, but one of our boundaries is if you're coming to visit us, you're not staying for 4 weeks. You're not staying for 3 weeks.
Listen, you're not staying for 2 weeks. That's our boundary.
That's what
and
works
we have
for
friends
us.
where their in-laws or their parents will come and have a one-way ticket.
Right, so they don't know when they're leaving.
Right, and I could say that on this podcast because we've been friends for over 20 years. So they know. They know. But
and we're not
they
knocking
don't have
them, but
that
it doesn't work with us.
It don't work for us.
For them,
and they
have a great marriage. So, I mean, it's just a boundary that they don't need. But for us, the way we're wired, Mark, I don't know how both of us are wired this way, but I guess it's good because then it's not like two extremes.
Right.
But we're both like, we're not the type to say family should not come around. We don't expect that.
No.
But there's something about us that hosting and people, usually a week is about the most.
Yeah.
And what I mean by being bold enough to stick with the boundaries. So some people say, well, I set boundaries and this person's blowing through them. Well, how are they blowing through them?
Yeah.
They're blowing through them because you're allowing it. So my mom said she knows of a couple years ago that the husband actually started to notice that his mom was in fact disrespecting his wife after he had spoken to her. So you know what he did? He started to say, you know what, Mom? I'm going to scale back on how much we come over your house.
Right.
And I'm going to scale back on how often you're allowed to come over here.
Yep.
And the mom got offended, but my mom said she always respected that man for sticking up for his wife because his thing was, I can literally see blatant disrespect.
Yep.
And we've set boundaries, but you're not following them. So the next course of action is now we're going to scale back how often we communicate with you. Now that might be more of an extreme example, but I guess what I'm still getting at is you have to set boundaries. And here's the thing about boundaries, Mark. Boundaries don't have to make sense to the person for whom they're being set.
Come on.
Boundaries are about what's going to work for your marriage.
I'm not setting
and
boundaries.
your household.
Yeah, I'm not setting boundaries for you. I'm setting it for me.
Right, because if it works for you, but it's tearing me up inside, then it's not a boundary. I'm still acquiescing to what you want.
Absolutely.
So what couples have to do is also communicate.
Yeah.
If you're a wife and you feel your in-laws are disrespecting you, or you're a husband and you feel like your in-laws are disrespecting you, the first step is to have a conversation with your spouse. That's your first course of action.
Yeah.
Let them know, hey, this is kind of what's been going on and I'm reading it as disrespect.
Mm-hmm.
And then from there, you all come up with a way to set boundaries for that in-law.
Right.
And also, when setting those boundaries, let your spouse handle their parent first before you try to.
So you're saying a lot.
Sorry.
Not because you're talking a lot, but there's so much there.
So many layers, yeah.
Yeah. There's so much there. So let's go back to the petty of this mom, right? To not say her daughter-in-law's name correctly.
Right.
Because it's petty.
Right.
Because she knows that she can remember it. Right. And what has to happen at the first sign of either disrespect or uncomfortability, something that you don't want, and it's coming from an in-law, then that has to be expressed.
Right. I like
it
that.
Has to be. You can't
keep brushing it off.
Brush it off. You can't sweep it under the rug.
Yeah.
You can't suffocate that thing because it just continues to grow, metastasize, and build up, and then you explode. And then your spouse is like, it's a big argument because that's his parents. Yeah. Right? And he loves them. He cares about them. And he doesn't know where this is coming from.
Right.
It's because you didn't address it. So the first thing to do is to really say, hey, I don't like when your mom does this. Mm-hmm. Okay? And then you start to work on priorities. Right? So it's a priority for your marriage.
Right.
That we're not going to allow, or I'm not going to allow as the husband, doesn't matter who it is, anybody to disrespect you.
Right.
And so that's really important. And you talked about communication. So, all right, now that we decided that, okay, there is some disrespect there, there is some petty there, we don't like this, how do we confront this as a unit?
Right.
And those are the prerequisite steps for setting that boundary.
Right.
You have to tackle it as a unit. You have to communicate and say, what are we going to accept? What are we not going to accept before you even start drawing a boundary? Because one of the wrong ways to go about it, Jen, is for if a daughter-in-law is feeling disrespected, for her to draw boundaries and not communicate that to her husband. For her to say, oh, I ain't going over there no more.
Right.
For her to be like, we not eating Sunday dinner with them no more. Or for that person isn't welcome. Well, we never talked about that.
Right.
So how are they all of a sudden immediately not welcome?
Correct.
And so the boundary can't be your boundary. It has to be our boundary.
That's good.
So I like that. So we talked about you have to address it. You have to have communication, and then you have to set a boundary for what you will receive and what you won't receive. You also mentioned that the Bible says if you're going to get married, you have to leave.
Right.
And then you have to connect to your spouse. So you have to leave your father and mother. You have to leave your family. What people don't, I think, realize is that how much God wants that inner circle family unit to be separate and distinct from your extended family.
Yeah.
Because he wants to work through that individual marriage.
Right.
He wants to work through that unit and produce something out of that. And you can't bring everybody into that space.
Right.
And so one of the best advice that we received when we were getting married, going through premarital counseling, is that they said, hey, for the first 6 months, don't allow anybody to come over your house. We're like, wait, what? What are you talking about? Like, not even my sister, not even my cousin, not even my mom. Like, how come I'm not going to bring my friends over, but it can't even be my family? And they were like, no, we adhered to that. And it really set the course for our marriage.
Yeah, it was amazing how in just 6 months we started to have conversations about, okay, this is the type of space we require.
Yeah.
This is the type of space we need.
Yeah.
And so we were able early on to form a united front. And it really was helpful. And I tell engaged couples all the time now, when you get married and start living together, take at least 6 months. Now, your sister said she took a whole year. But we...
because it's my sister. Right. So she need a year.
So we're like,
at least need a year.
Take those 6 months.
Yeah.
And figure out, because the thing is, it's so new living with the person. So just even figure out, what do you want your household atmosphere to feel like?
Right.
You know, what are going to be some house rules that you guys want visitors to also adhere to?
Yeah.
So I think that's also important.
Yeah, that's good. And so there's so many levels to this, but at some point you're going to have to interact.
Yeah.
Like, you can't, maybe you can like move across the world and do your best to avoid your in-laws. But at some point, you're going to come together. At some point, you're going to have the cookout in the backyard. At some point, you're going to have Thanksgiving. At some point, a family event is going to bring everybody together.
Right.
Sometimes it's a good family event. Sometimes it's a negative one.
Yeah.
So you can't avoid your in-laws. There has to be understanding there.
Yeah.
Rules of engagement there.
Yeah.
And what I've learned, Jen, is like, go in there being nice.
Right.
Like, I would never disrespect your parents. No matter the circumstance.
Yeah.
And sometimes you're even like, hey, why don't you just be a little bit more straight? Because I can be a straightforward person.
Right. And with your parents, you're always going to be straight.
Oh, my parents are Jamaican, so we gonna go in.
Yeah, because there's times I'm like, Mark, why don't you just say to my mom, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
And, but I mean, you're already an even-tempered guy to begin with. So sometimes the things that I'm like, Mark, hand me the phone, because I'm just going to tell my mom, no, we're not doing that.
Yeah.
You know, or all you have to do is blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
But you just won't.
No, I'm the nice son-in-law.
Yeah.
I don't cause problems. I fix everything around the house for them.
Yeah.
Whatever you need, I make myself available. Because my job is to make the relationship between son and in-laws as easy as possible.
Yeah.
Because what that does is it just sets the course for a relationship that can be successful, because I know things will come up. But if you believe I'm nice, then we can get through it. If you believe I'm coming from the right place. The problem is, Jen, is that some people go in guns blazing.
Yeah.
You have some women, they get married, right? They go into the house for family dinner, and they're walking in like this is because they're married to the son, they're taking over, right? And the mom is like, wait, where is this girl coming from? Where's the chick coming from? She's just trying to take over everything. She's trying to be involved in everything. Now she wants to cook the turkey for Thanksgiving. And the turkey's always been cooked by Big Mom. Like, she just trying to run everything. Nah. My advice would be come in docile, come in even, come in a little bit meek, and more people will like you.
Yeah.
And love you.
Absolutely. I also think that you have to understand in marriage that changes to your family are going to disrupt the dynamics a little bit.
Yeah.
And you just have to watch it and make sure it remains seasonal and not permanent. And what I mean by that is when we were having our kids, especially our first child, it disrupted a little bit of the communication between me and your mom.
Right.
Not even so much me and my mom, but me and your mom, because I was living away from my mom, and everybody has their thoughts on how to handle a pregnancy, how to handle a baby. And I just felt during that season that your mom and I have never had a blowout, knock out, drop down argument. But I just felt like in that season, we just weren't gelling
tension.
the way we used to.
Yeah.
And I remember one day you literally called your mom. I'll never forget it. And you're like, you know what, Mom? I know you probably mean well, but I just got to let you know, like, you've been making Jay feel pretty bad lately.
Right.
Like some of the stuff you say, it's just making her feel bad.
Right.
And she actually took it well and said she didn't realize. She was like, I love Jay. I wasn't trying to make her feel bad. But sometimes, like, the unsolicited advice or, Jen, why are you wearing those shoes during your I'm like, and you're more emotional.
Yeah.
Or she was like, why are you giving the baby that? And I'm like, because I want, like, that's what I want to give her, you know? And so I say all that to say, just like having kids will bring a different shift to your marriage, also be mindful and aware that if you're bringing children into the marriage, or you're moving away, further away than they're used to you being, or you're moving closer. Yeah. These types of things can also cause disruptions. Yeah. And so you just have to be aware of that as well, and also have a plan for.
Absolutely.
If they're coming at you with something that you don't like, it's okay to say that, but also just know chances are a big enough transition is not going to cause probably some sort of disruption. Right. And I think it happens more on the female side, because us having children really didn't impact your relationship with my parents, even for a season.
No.
Like, it just didn't.
No.
It didn't disrupt anything. But on my end, it was a little more disruptive. I'm the one carrying the child. I'm the one that's more emotional. Right. I'm the one that has thoughts on how I want to see motherhood played out, compared to my mother-in-law, who may have had some different thoughts about certain things. Yeah. And so it was just getting back on track. But I loved how even if I was being irrational, or even if I was being emotional, you actually took the time to say to your mom, some of the stuff you're saying in this season is just not going to go well. It's
just not going to go well. And I'm glad that I have the ability and the relationship, the rapport with my mom, that we can talk like that. Yeah. But she's just a nice person.
Right.
So that works. And you're going to have to, at some point, you're going to have to stand up for your spouse.
That's the thing. If you're passive when it comes to your parents,
you're going to have to do it.
It's going to be very difficult.
Yeah.
Very difficult for your marriage to be healthy and thrive and have any sort of boundaries if you, when it comes to your mom, all of a sudden you don't want to speak up. When it comes to your dad, you don't want to speak up. Like on Yellowstone. Because John Dutton on Yellowstone, played by Kevin Costner, he is such a domineering force.
Yeah.
So controlling.
Yeah.
Tells his kids what they're going to be, where they're going to go, what job they're going to have.
Listen.
But in real life, some parents are like that.
And if you allow it, then you really can't complain. Because you're not standing up for your marriage.
Right.
and you're not doing what's required in order for your marriage to be successful. And that's also what I was thinking about, Jen, is like, if you're having issues with your in-laws, it's because your in-laws are too involved.
Yeah.
Your in-laws are too involved.
Right.
If you're having issues with your in-laws, that means you have to create another boundary.
Correct.
Or more distance, more separation.
Yeah.
Because you haven't found the sweet spot yet.
Mm-hmm.
And like, stop telling your parents. So if we have an argument and I go take that to my parents,
right,
stop doing that.
Right.
Stop telling your mom. So you and your mom have a great relationship, or just a scenario, a wife and her mom has a great relationship. The wife gets in an argument with her husband, or they have a disagreement, and she takes that to her mom.
Yeah.
Like, stop doing that, because her mom is going to, her bias, her anger, her everything is going to be towards her son-in-law.
Right.
But she's not married to her son-in-law. She doesn't have a relationship like that with her son-in-law. So she can't forgive her son-in-law.
Yeah.
She can't reconcile in the same way. All she can do is continue to allow that anger to build.
Yeah.
And that is that's one of the major wedges that is thrown into a marriage, is because each party or either party is talking too much to their side.
Yep.
About their spouse.
Absolutely. And if you're a mama's boy, that's going to be a difficult marriage too.
Yo.
If you are married to a mama's boy, you're
careful.
going to have in-law issues.
Absolutely.
Because a mama's boy makes a decision based on what mom says.
Yep.
Tells mom what they're arguing about. Filters everything through mom.
Yeah.
And so I don't know what it's like to be married to a mama's boy.
Right.
But I just know that I've seen mama's boys that are married, and it's not that the couple always ends up in divorce, but they just have a tough time on the in-law side. So this is also not just for the women, for the men as well. Stop taking everything to mom.
Yeah. And that's really what causes a lot of problems.
Absolutely.
It's difficult because you've grown up with that parent or parents, and you're used to leaning on them for advice.
Yeah.
Keep them out. Like, just keep them out. Work on it together.
Yes.
It'll build a healthy and strong marriage. You just have to keep the in-laws out of business.
Yeah.
And how you're doing certain things, and they can only give an outside perspective, but you're bringing them into inside discussions and decisions.
Exactly.
There's no way they can give you what you need and really help the marriage.
And just make sure your boundaries are also specific.
Yeah.
I mean, when we had our kids, what was great is both of our moms were in a position to kind of take turns in the first couple of weeks and help us, because just to give some context, you actually split up your maternity leave, which was kind of cool. So you ended up getting more than 2 weeks because you would split it up. But anyway, we actually were telling the moms, when you come over, here's what we would like for you to work on.
Yeah.
You want to help with laundry? Perfect. You want to feed the baby sometimes? That's okay. You want to make dinner? That's okay. But there were certain things that were like, you don't need to open my mail. That's not something that I need you to do. I just had a baby. I'm not incapacitated.
Right.
And so it's not that they tried to open our mail, but I'm giving it as an example of, we were just specific on, here's the ways in which you can help.
Yep.
And I think there's a way to also set the boundary, and we weren't nasty about it.
Yeah.
And we set that because we knew, again, what would cause us the least amount of stress. We wanted them to be able to have the freedom to come over and spend time with their grandchildren and help, because the reality is, when you just have a baby, you do need some sort of help.
Yeah.
But we also said, hey, here's what you can work on. And if it doesn't fall within that context, Mark will get it, or it's something that Jen feels like she can do.
Right.
And so you have to also be clear. Don't just leave it vague with something like, stop verbally disrespecting me. You have to be specific and say, we don't like when you call Mary every name other than Mary.
Right.
That to us is disrespectful. Be specific. Don't just say, stop verbally abusing me. Because then the person's like, oh, I'm not verbally abusing you.
Yeah. Why would I do that?
Right.
Yeah.
So be specific about what is bothering you.
Yeah.
And I would say also, Mark, spouses have to try their best to have an open mind. If your spouse comes to you and says, hey, your mom or your dad is doing this and it's making me feel away. Because sometimes it's by default, you just want to be defensive towards your family.
Absolutely.
So to the person who asked this question, if you're the one that's having problems with your in-laws, I would also encourage your spouse to be open-minded to say, well, let me think about this. Is my spouse really coming from a place of they just want to stir the pot?
Right.
Or should I look at this a little bit more and maybe realize, like, wait a minute, there might be a little something there.
Yeah. Jen, because what do you do about a spouse who's trying to tear you away from your family? And they're doing it because they're insecure.
Yeah.
They're doing it because they resent certain things. They're doing it because maybe they don't have the great family that you have. Mm-hmm. They're doing it because they're jealous.
Yeah.
And possessive over time. That's a real thing.
Yeah, it is.
That's a real thing that, you may be realizing that you married to a crazy.
Uh-oh.
And you don't know how this is really going to end because you can see that they just want to tear you away from your family.
Yeah.
And it's not coming from the right place.
Yeah.
Like, I can never go check on my mom.
Right.
I can never call my mom.
Right.
Like, what's up with that?
Correct.
Where you coming from
right.
with that? That is absolutely a real thing. And I think you have to be able to also check your spouse.
Yes.
And say, nah, this is too far. Mm-hmm. Why do you really not want me to call my mom or check in?
Right. Yeah. Well, because if you're going to that extreme, it's not that you're having difficulty with your in-laws. For some reason, you're trying to sabotage your spouse's relationship with their side of the family, which is never okay.
Yeah. That's never okay. And we really need to consider that.
Yeah. So then you also have to pray for wisdom, pray for discernment. And listen, I'm an advocate about praying for everything. Also just pray and ask God to restore your relationship with your in-laws. Yeah. And restoration doesn't mean y'all have to be best friends.
Right.
But just pray and ask God, at least when we come together, let there be enough peace that we can get through a family function.
Yeah.
We can get through the holidays.
Yeah.
We can get through a phone call.
Yeah.
We can get through them coming to see their grandchildren. You literally can pray and ask God also, hey, while I'm setting these boundaries, just work on both of our hearts so that there's an understanding, there's a maturity that comes into the relationship that says, hey, chances are you're not going to talk to your in-laws on the phone every day or maybe even as often as you speak to your own side of the family.
Right.
But pray for peace.
Pray for it. Lean into God and just allow him to give you the discernment that you need to navigate that situation. But I was also thinking about, Jen, that when you marry someone, you marry their family as well, but it matters their ethnicity. It matters their culture. So, we married, and you married me. I'm American,
right?
Born and raised, but the culture of my family is Jamaican.
Right.
So you had to deal with marrying into another culture.
Yeah.
And not really understanding all the nuances of that culture. You were blessed to get some experience with Jamaicans when you were living in other states. And so you were around them. But you had to now say, man, how do I navigate this family dynamic? The more flexible you are, is the better you can move through the different waters of in-laws and say, hey, I have to be this way when I'm with my side. I have to be this way when I'm with their side. I have to be flexible because they like this joke, but the other side likes that joke.
Right.
They like to hang out here, but the other side so you have to be flexible and say, I can move in different elements. I can move in different places. And it speaks to culture. It absolutely speaks to culture. Mm-hmm. There's the culture of your marriage.
Right.
Then there's the culture of your in-laws.
Right.
Then there's the culture of your parents.
Mm-hmm.
And they may be quite different.
Absolutely.
But you have to know how to move through those different cultures and not say it's a bad culture if it's different.
Yeah.
I just have to adapt to that culture. Mm-hmm. And when it's at my house, then y'all have to adapt to my culture.
Exactly.
And I think that's some of the difficulties is people's inflexibility. People's rigidity.
Right.
Like they're not really able to be flexible enough to connect with their in-laws on that level.
Yeah.
It just doesn't have to be one way.
Absolutely.
So those are the things that absolutely make a difference, you know? Mm-hmm. And here, like, can I push a little bit further?
Sure.
You know, the in-laws, coming from an in-laws perspective, mm-hmm. they're not marrying who you love.
Right.
So they haven't sometimes even spent enough time mm-hmm. to like them, let alone love them. Mm-hmm. And they may not trust them.
Yeah.
They because there hasn't been enough time there. So maybe they're suspicious. Maybe they suspect that the person doesn't have the best intentions for their child, mm-hmm. for their daughter, for their son. That is okay. You have to kind of understand that and get that people have different paces as it relates to trust.
Right.
So they may not trust, that you're going to take care. All right, I have a daughter. Mm-hmm. And so if a guy's going to come marry my daughter and take her away.
Right.
I've got to trust you.
Right. Exactly. I think that's a good thing to note, Mark, is that especially more distant in-laws. So what I mean by that is if it's aunts, uncles, cousins, grandparents, they may have had even less time with your spouse before the marriage than your parents had.
Yeah.
Right. And so that's absolutely true. I mean, we know a couple that the husband's parents live in a totally different country. They live in a totally different continent.
Yeah.
And so while the bride did meet her in-laws before they got married, she didn't get to spend as much time with them as he got to spend with her parents. Yeah. And so it would only be natural for the mom to be like, are you really going to take care of my son, though, the way he needs to be cared for? So I guess all those factors and nuances are necessary to take into account. Have they had the opportunity to get to know your spouse the way you have? Yeah. And if the answer is no, then also give some grace there. And we're not saying by giving grace, allow disrespect. But I guess what you're saying is also think about what perspective might they be coming from.
Yeah.
And even if they're coming from an okay perspective, but it's just coming out incorrectly, then of course you address it.
Yeah. I think that's absolutely really, really good. And so, man, it's a tough thing. It's a real thing. In-laws can absolutely destroy a marriage if you're not careful about it. But if you work on it with your spouse, you'll be okay. Never allow an in-law to keep you from your destiny.
Wow. That's good.
Never allow anybody to keep you from your destiny. If that person is your person and they're your destiny, don't lose it over an in-law.
Yeah.
Like, figure that thing out. Be relentless and say, man, I believe my destiny is connected to this person, so I'm going to fight for them. You may have never thought you would have to fight as it relates to in-laws. Like you thought you would have to fight as it relates to ex-girlfriend,
Right.
ex-boyfriend, text messages, DMs. But nah, it's an in-law. But you're going to have to fight for that thing if you believe it belongs to you.
Absolutely.
So don't be afraid to do that. Really, really push for it and really try and make that happen. Because what matters most is that person and that spouse.
Yeah, I like that.
Yeah. What else you got?
Well, I would also just say that when it comes to in-laws, it's probably going to be a work in progress. It's probably going to be ebbs and flows.
Yeah.
Because you also have to understand that it's just like any other relationship.
Yeah.
Some days are going to be better than others. The goal is not to have perfectly sunny days every single time you interact with them. The goal is to have a mutual respect and understanding on both sides. So that way, when the difficult days come, you can quickly plow through it, navigate it, and move on.
Yeah.
So I just don't want anyone to have an unrealistic expectation. Some in-laws are literally like peanut butter and jelly. They're fine. But I would say for the average relationship, they're probably not going to be your best friends. So you're not looking for that to determine whether or not your relationship with them is successful.
Yeah.
What you're looking for is, do we respect each other? Do we understand each other?
Yeah.
Can we be in the same room without going at each other's throats?
Yeah.
Those are the wins. Those are the successes.
Absolutely. I actually feel like our marriage and our relationship with our in-laws is an anomaly. I don't think most marriages have it as good as we have it. Just based on our experience.
Yeah.
I don't think that's the case. I think for the most part, husbands and wives, they don't really love their in-laws. I think for the most part, they don't really like their in-laws.
Ugh.
They just actually manage them and they just tolerate them. And it is what it is. But it's really tough.
Yeah, it can be.
And you have to fight for your marriage, and you have to really draw those boundaries in order for it to work. And I was just thinking about, as you were talking there, how, I've just heard stories where the mother-in-law doesn't really like the daughter-in-law because of the trauma of the mother-in-law.
Right.
So the mother-in-law has had bad relationships.
Yeah.
The mother-in-law has had a failed marriage or two. And the mother-in-law is projecting all of that anger towards her daughter-in-law.
Right.
Because she's just filled with jealousy. She's filled with so much rage because of her trauma, her experiences.
Right.
And it's just a tough situation for that daughter-in-law. All those things are very real things that people have to consider when they're jumping into marriage. Jen, I believe that's why all of these factors really accumulate.
Yeah.
And can be the cause for the high divorce rate that we see. That, man, there's so many things that go into a marriage, and people check out, and people say, you know what? If I'm going to be going through this, I'm better off single.
Yeah.
Can you really work out the in-law dynamic before you get married?
Right. I would say it just all depends on the parties involved.
Yeah.
I think sometimes you can.
Yeah.
If you notice early on that it's going to be a problem, I think sometimes you can, but not always.
Yeah. It's not always easy. So there's a lot of nuances here. And I think we did a pretty good job of unpacking this.
Yeah.
But we love to hear more questions. We'd love to hear what you're thinking, what you want to hear, some advice on, and our perspective on. And we want to keep this thing rolling. We want to keep pushing. We love doing this. If you haven't gotten the book yet,
please
grab the book. It'll be linked below. in the description. It's on Amazon, and it's a great resource for you and your marriage. And we pray that your marriage continues to grow and be healthy. But I think this wraps this episode up. And it's been a good talk. So this has been another episode of Young and Married, and we will catch you next time. Peace out.